Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of the Table Podcast. This week, we jump back into the story of Cain and Abel as we start to see other places in Scripture where this story is played out and how it relates to us. On today's episode, you'll hear from Tanner Moore, Ryan Froese, Garrison Jones, and Sean Decker. Thanks for joining us at the table.
Ryan, why don't you just give us like a 2-minute little recap of that first part of our study in Cain and Abel, just the kind of maybe a highlight that stands out to you, and just anything that you thought of that first piece that we did there.
Okay, so we talked about the Cain and Abel story, talking about why was Cain's sacrifice not acceptable to God, and why was Abel's. We talked about how most likely, or I think that's kind of where we left it, was that it probably had to do with comparison. Having said that, it doesn't tell us, and I think, to be honest, and I'll just kind of pull from stuff that we've talked about in the past, and I think that's something that I've learned a lot of in the past maybe 4 years of studying the Bible, is that sometimes things are not there on purpose, and that might be the point. Which I really like. I like that viewpoint. I like that mentality, because there's so many times reading the Bible that I've been like, okay, there's some missing information here.
That's right. Yeah.
And then it helps me to dig in. Okay, why is it missing? Maybe there's a reason for it. But yeah. So.
Cool. I love that. It's like the Bible is not trying to give us the answer to every question. The Bible's trying to give us wisdom to answer questions.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Right. And so, we gotta have our right expectations as we come to the Scripture. Are we looking for an answer? Are we looking for wisdom? I think that Jesus told some stories about that. I think that the book of Proverbs talks about wisdom crying out in the streets, like begging people, come find me. And that's what the text wants to give us, is wisdom. Not always answers, but wisdom.
That's good.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think sometimes we focus too much on those answers, because I think, I don't know, this is just culture talking here. Thinking about how I grew up in America, and just the mindset that I had, I always felt like there had to be an answer. Well, if there's a contradiction or just an issue with my faith, I've got to be able to go find that answer in the Bible. And then sometimes you're like, I don't know. I don't find the answer here. You know what I mean? And,
That's right.
And so, I do think that's important, because it's just like we left off last time. Only I know.
Yeah.
Whether what I'm like, because I'm the one in relationship with God, so I know where my relationship is. There's nobody sitting here that can tell me where my relationship is with God.
That's good.
Now, you can look at somebody's fruit and say, hey, he probably is in tune with God.
Sure.
But you really don't know.
There's evidence.
And there's evidence, but you never really know.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because it's not my job to judge. It's not my job to say, well, Sean's doing what he's supposed to be doing.
Right.
It's none of my business. I'm going to handle what I have with my relationship with God.
That's right.
And go from there.
Yeah, and let's talk about why, and what this story has to say about why it's important that you handle your relationship with God, that I handle my relationship with God, and that we all, fulfill those individual responsibilities. Garrison, why don't you read this part of the text for us? Sure. Let's just focus in here on verses 6 and 7. Before you do that, remember, Cain and Abel both brought sacrifices. Cain's a farmer, so he brings produce. Abel is a shepherd. He brings the firstborn of his flock. God looks favorably on Abel. He does not look favorably on Cain. And so here is so Cain's upset about it. So go
6
ahead.
and 7?
6 and 7.
This is Genesis chapter 4.
Genesis
right?
4, that's right.
Yeah.
Genesis 4, and I'm reading from the NIV. So it says this: Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it."
Let me just what mental pictures come into your mind as you read those verses that God speaks to Cain there? What are some thoughts that run through your head, or some pictures you get?
I've also been listening to that Bible Project podcast.
Yeah.
And this is a verse that they go over. And so there's a I think there's like an overview where it talks about, the serpent or whatever. And there's a video where it's this monster that's like crouching at the door behind Cain, and Cain is like having to decide what he's going to do. Is he going to listen or is he not? And that's the mental picture I get, just because that's something that I've been doing lately. So
Yeah. Cool. That idea of the beast of the field that crouches at the door, kind of how the beast of the field, the snake, crouched climbed into the garden and crouched at the door and whispered to Eve, and
there was a choice to be made in that same moment, right?
There was a choice to be made, and we've talked at length about how the Bible recycles these stories, and and to use those Bible Project terms, it hyperlinks the stories back to other stories, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward into the book of 1 Samuel. But I really want to just hone in on these few verses here. It's almost as if God is commissioning Cain, right? That like he has a responsibility to do what's right. And inside this verse, I think there's the answer is here, but it might take a little digging to get there, and a little Hebrew and some of that. But let's speculate for a moment. What's the reason for doing what's right? I tell you what. Let's back up a little bit. We all have children. You ever try to tell your kids that they have to do what's right?
Nope.
absolutely.
Yes.
And do they ever say why? And what's your answer?
Because I said so.
Yeah. And sometimes that's the right answer. I believe that sometimes that is the right answer.
Well, I'll be honest. That is probably the answer I got the most when I was a child.
Yeah.
Is because I'm your dad, or because I'm your mom. Therefore, you're going to obey me.
That's right.
I feel like maybe we do it too much, but we try to explain.
Yeah.
We try to explain this is why.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the whole. If you lie to me, then I don't know if I can believe you anymore. You know what I mean? And you try to explain why lying is bad.
Yeah.
But
it goes back to that wisdom thing from last time. I have wisdom because I've been there. Just trust me that this is better for you. I can't explain it sometimes. It's hard, but trust my wisdom because I've been in your shoes type deal. I'm at the hitter 2 and 3, so they don't understand that.
Sure.
Eventually,
Right.
And they do. I mean, our kids are older, and so we're going through some of those things, talking about character and doing what's right when no one's looking, and and then tying it back to, our relationship with God and how, that's a reflection of your fruits in, your walk with Him, and how it affects more than just yourself. Like, when you sin or whenever you disobey or lie or whatever, that it's not just about you, that it goes further, than just yourself.
Yeah. Let's back the story up a little bit, all the way to the beginning, Genesis chapter 1. And in Genesis chapter 1, God, He speaks to the humans for the first time in towards the end of chapter 1. I think like verse 26 and 27 is when he creates man or mankind, and then he blesses them. And Ryan, I see you pulling it up right there. Would you read that blessing that God gives to humanity there at the end of Genesis 1?
Okay, so it looks like it starts verse 28.
Okay.
God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was good. It was evening. It was morning, the sixth day.
All right. So those first couple of things that God speaks to humanity, what are they?
Fruitful,
Be fruitful,
increase in number,
multiply,
subdue.
and rule. Yeah. Be fruitful, increase in number, but we skipped one.
Fill the earth.
Fill the earth up. And so the blessing that God gives humanity is to be able to do the thing that God does. Right? God is the creator. But he makes man in his image, and by man I mean mankind. He makes humanity in his image with the capacity to make more man. Right? Humans have within themselves the ability to multiply the image of God. And only God has the ability to multiply himself and to multiply life, but he endows us with that same ability to multiply life, to multiply his image, to multiply his glory, and to fill the earth up with it, right? And that's the blessing. So then we look at the Cain story and God's speech to Cain, and he says this thing. He says, sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you, right? It desires you. Now, the word there that's used to talk about sin's desire is often used in the Bible to talk about a husband's desire for his wife, or a man seeing a beautiful woman and his desire to have her. And it says that sin desires to have Cain. And so I think that there is, if you trace that logic, if you keep pushing that logic forward, what you come to is the union of sin and humanity, almost like it impregnates and births something into the world, which is what humans are supposed to do, is produce more life, produce more beauty, to be fruitful, to produce more good.
Yeah.
God made good, and he gave humans the ability to make more good. But when sin comes knocking, you have a chance to produce something as well.
Yeah.
And that production, that consequence, that manifestation is just as tangible as the good that you could produce should you live in God's wisdom and in God's blessing, right? Let's pause there for just a little bit. Let's think about that. What has that been true in your life? Have you ever experienced that before, that your, or maybe someone union with sin produces real, tangible consequences in the world? What do you think?
I think more times than not. And sometimes it takes some time. But eventually a union with sin will have consequences.
Yeah.
It may be small, but it may be big, but eventually it is going to have consequences.
Yeah.
And go back to the fall in Genesis 3. What did God do? There were consequences.
Sure.
Too, then.
Sure. Yeah, let's keep going with this. What do you think? Are there tangible consequences that are, to use the biblical metaphor, that are birthed into the world, almost as an illegitimate offspring, an illegitimate child, whenever I choose to unite myself to sin, or when I let sin have me?
I mean, I definitely think so. To be 100% honest, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, and it's not the same topic as what you're asking about. Because I'm just thinking about the, you talking about sin desiring you. There was a podcast I was listening to, and they were talking about this, and it's in Genesis chapter 3, the curse that God put on the serpent that said he would eat dust the rest of his life, but serpents don't really eat dust. And then he started talking about how the human was made from dust.
Yeah.
And so basically that sin would desire to devour. Would hunger for flesh. Wow. And flesh in a sense of like our fleshly desire.
Yeah.
And so that's sorry. I know that's not exactly what you asked, but that's what I was thinking about
absolutely.
Is that sin is desiring to devour us.
Yeah.
Because that, to me, then leads to more sin. Yeah.
I think on our question, so maybe an example would be like if I have a sin of envy, if I envy what Ryan has, that's going to give birth to maybe hate, to anxiety, and while it's not necessarily tangible or I can see it, I can feel it, and it's real.
Yes. You
know, whereas maybe it's not a tangible thing I can set on the table. I can't set my hate on the table. It is a very real thing that I know is there when I have the sin of envy or whatever else. So I think while I'm having trouble coming up with a tangible thing I can set on the table that's actually literally birthed physically, I think emotionally things are birthed a lot. That's
Absolutely.
an easy way to think about that.
Yeah, and I also think though that it is tangible, right? Like hatred has real physical implications on your body, right? Which are also felt by the people around you.
It's true.
Let me give an example that has been kind of important to me in my life. It's when I give into the sin of anger, I think that we often talk about things like, well, you have a responsibility to do what is right, because if you don't, your relationship with God will be damaged, which will put your, for lack of going into a lot of theology here, but which will put your eternity at stake. And again, I know that we could break that down theologically for a long time, but
it's episode 4,
right? Yeah, like you get what I'm saying, right? Like that's what we tell kids, right? Well, why should you do what's right? Because God wants you to. Well, why should I care what God wants? So that you can go to heaven one day. And it's about me, and it's about my choices have an impact on my eternal destiny or my, standing in God's presence. But when I give into the sin of anger, what happens to my marriage that evening? You ever been angry at home and you're not angry with your wife, but you're angry about something that you should release? And what happens that evening between you and your spouse? There's real consequences.
Strain, yeah.
And what about whenever my 3-year-old comes running up to me and all he wants to do is play, and he just kind of like jumps on me and he tackles me a little too hard and he hits his head into my head, which happens all the time, and his head is harder than this table, and I'm already angry, and so what's my reaction now?
To go off,
Bennett, and that sounded just like my dad when I said that right there, but I do that all the time these days, and but you get that reaction, and now what's our relationship like?
Yeah, exactly.
Now our relationship breaks a little bit, and he doesn't want to come running up to me tomorrow to jump on me and play, because he's a little bit afraid of me now because I jumped on him, and it's all because I let myself be united to anger. There are real consequences for uniting yourself to sin, right? Like it births brokenness into the world.
Yeah. Well, that's where I was going, was just the family that, if we are disobedient as fathers and as husbands, if we're disobedient to God's call in our life, then what will that look like for our kids? Are they going to be followers of Christ and plugged into the church and serving in the church? And then if they don't, what will their kids? That whole idea of generational gaps of following God.
Right.
And so that's my tangible thing that I went to is if, if we are following hard after God and teaching our kids to, then that's the good, I guess the good fruit that can come out of that. Whereas the opposite is if we aren't doing our job, then what will our grandkids look like? What will their kids look like as far as their relationship?
Absolutely. And I think the question should go one step further and ask not only why should you do what is right, but if you fail to do what is right, who has to live with those manifested consequences? Who lives with the manifested consequences of your union with sin?
Yeah, a lot of times the people that are closest to you.
Yeah. I don't think it's a lot of times. I think it's every time.
It's good.
Right? Have you ever caused your household to break a little bit?
Absolutely.
Because of your own union with sin?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Good.
And we hate it, but it's true.
Yeah, I hate to admit that, right? That's a pretty humbling thing.
Absolutely.
And I think about having to go to my kids and apologizing for the way I acted, and taking, I'm not very good at admitting when I was wrong or when, that's humbling, but I think there's some good restoration in that too, and some good lessons.
Yeah. And that's a part of the study, right? Is that there is, God does respond to this situation at the end, right? There is a solution and there is an atonement, and we'll get there. So there is good news, right? This is not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And so, thanks for bringing that up, Sean, for sure. I'll say that my house changed whenever I really got into this story about a year and a half ago. And as simple as it is, I had the realization that my wife and kids live with the consequences of my sin as much as I do. That my anger affects them as much as it affects me. That my lethargy, or my apathy, my whatever you want to fill in the blank, right? Is my comparison to other people, which leads to a great deal of stress, which leads to a short temper, and those people that I love have to live with my illegitimate offspring.
Wow.
Right? And that's not fair. And that's not right. But you look in the story and you say, who lives with the consequences of Cain's union with sin? Who is it?
His brother.
Yeah. And then let's keep going.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
Abel,
his
because
parents.
who loses their life? Not Cain.
Right.
It's Abel.
Did Abel choose to not do what is right?
Right.
It's not his choice. But he's going to live with the consequences. Well, and no pun intended,
Right.
but
Right.
he doesn't even get to live with the consequences.
Yeah.
Then you said parents.
parents,
Talk about that.
Golly, I can't imagine what Adam and Eve were going through at that point. Just, just
How long did it take us for humans to start killing each other?
Yeah.
Like for the hate to build up that much?
Yeah.
One generation,
Yeah.
right? It's crazy.
I just like if I put myself in Adam's shoes, the first thing I'd do is think, "Oh my gosh, what did I do wrong?"
If
Like,
I
I
wouldn't
should
have
have
eaten
done
that fruit.
Yeah, or I should have. Yeah, that,
Wow. Yeah.
I could have done something different to,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think too, going back to Adam, like you weren't around to help Eve and to help her, and then here again, same thing, right? Where were you when your kids started hating each other? You're not around again, like kind of that guilt kind of started setting in for sure.
Yeah. And not only did they lose Abel, but what's Cain's punishment?
He's banished.
He's
basically.
banished.
Cast
So
out.
they lose two sons,
Yeah.
right? So Cain lives with the consequences of his choice, but so does everyone else around him.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really important piece of this story that we have to dwell on is why do you have a responsibility to do what's right? Why does God care that Cain choose to do what's right? It's because if he does not, he's going to produce something into the world that is the opposite of good. And the people around him who didn't make that choice are going to have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I think the Bible term for this is called injustice. This is injustice. Whenever I, an innocent person, have to live with the consequences of someone else's union with sin, that's injustice. God didn't set out to create an unjust world. He set out for a world that was just. And here we see injustice bringing decay, the opposite of life, the opposite of fruitful, the opposite of multiplication. Mm-hmm. Cain's union with sin leads to death, the removal of life, the breaking and splintering of families. Mm-hmm. And as simple of a truth as this is, how profound for the world that we live in.
Yeah.
Right? Where's the practical application to you?
Super convicting. Just thinking about how coming home, dealing with the stresses of what's going on. I've always been I try to, separate that part of my life. Like, okay, that's work. I'm going to leave that there. Yeah. But you do end up taking it home with you a lot. Mm-hmm. And you don't think about it. Mm-hmm. And so for me, one of the things that whenever I get into a situation where I'm doing the same thing, it's because I haven't dealt with what happened at work or what's going on. And so I just bring it home and try to ignore it.
You didn't master it.
Right. I just left it alone, thinking, I'm just going to leave that there. Yeah. But sometimes the inaction's the problem. Sometimes the problem is not doing something about it. Instead
That's
of
good.
You know what you understand what I'm
absolutely. Yeah. And I was actually, that's a perfect segue. I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah, no.
Into kind of the final point here in this little segment I wanted to make is there a difference between avoiding wrong and doing right?
No, I 100% think so.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Well, because he tells him you have a choice to make.
Yeah,
and I think not choosing is not a choice.
I agree.
Right?
That's right.
And I'm kind of the world's worst at sweeping things under the rug and sort of pretending they're not there. I don't let a lot of things bother me, but that's not always the best action either. Like, the problem is still there, or the situation or the issue is still there, even if I'm choosing to ignore it, like what you're saying, or sweep it under the rug. And so that's not a choice. So that's not making a choice. Yeah.
Can we back it up a second?
Let's do it.
So verse 6, isn't it an interesting question? Like, Cain is not his sacrifice is not accepted, so God, and he's angry, and God asks, "Why are you angry?" That's an interesting question, right?
Yeah.
Like, imagine if you had a kid on your basketball team that played all the time, and he didn't play a single minute after the game. He said, "Hey, why are you mad, man?"
Yeah.
Like, God's challenging him. Like,
he is.
Why are you mad? Just do what's right.
Yeah.
Right. And how often does he ask us that? Why are you mad right now? You're the one that's causing all this chaos.
Right.
I think that's an interesting way that God, that's a clear answer. Why are you angry? Why are you downcast? You're the one causing this mess.
You know the answer.
Right. Exactly.
Why are you mad?
Yeah. Why are you mad at this?
Exactly.
It's kind of interesting.
Oh, sure.
How God handled that.
Yeah. And I mean, but haven't you asked that question before?
Absolutely.
Wait. Why are you mad about this?
Yeah.
You know the reason. You know the reason, and you know the answer.
Yeah.
But why does God ask that question? What is the answer?
Are you asking
specifically? I am. Yeah. Like, what is the answer?
The answer for Cain?
Yeah.
His heart's not in the right place.
Yeah, Cain didn't do what's right.
Yeah,
but
he didn't do what's right.
Who has to come to that conclusion?
He does.
He does.
Cain does.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's what I think God's trying to get out of him.
Right.
Hey, why are you mad? Evaluate what you're doing here, man. We're missing some information, but whatever it is, there's something missing in this deal.
Yeah.
Well, and if God just comes out and tells Cain, you didn't do what was right. Now the ball's in God's court.
Yeah.
Right? And in a way, the ball's always in God's court. But Now it's God's
theology.
responsibility
Yeah.
to get Cain to do.
Absolutely.
But that's not what God is requiring here. This is not God's job to make this choice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cain has to make this choice. And so, you asked the question way back at the beginning, I think, why does God just let Cain do this? Why doesn't God step in and save Abel? Well, because this is Cain's choice to make, right? Because the flip side of that is, if Cain does choose what's right, he produces good fruit in the world. If he does choose what's right, then there is good that is produced.
Yeah.
He is fruitful, and he multiplies the goodness of who God made him to be. Right? And so it's important to look at both sides of that, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And then just thinking about the long-lasting consequences of that as well.
Both directions.
Both
Yeah, I
directions.
agree with that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because if you think about, well, what could Cain have done if he would have made the right choice? How different would the world be?
Yeah.
Same thing with Abraham. You know what I mean? I mean, some of the consequences of his actions we're still dealing with today.
Yeah.
You know?
That's yeah. And the last study we did just a moment ago was about freedom and no pressure in this one, but every choice you make has world-changing implications, right? Like, you're going to change the world with what you choose to do. Because I tell our kids, our high school kids especially, that the world that we live in today is a product of last generation's choices.
Yeah.
Right? And like, my kids are going to grow up in a world that's produced by my choices and your choices. Like, that's the world they're going to grow up in. And then they're going to create a world with their choices for the next generation. And sometimes those are immediate, like the choice of me and anger in my house that evening. And sometimes those effects are, long term and long reaching, and they have, not necessarily immediate implications, but they've got, long term implications. But they change the world.
Yep.
But the flip side of that is also true. You have the ability to change the world for
Absolutely.
good, because God made you that way. He made you in his image with his ability to produce more life. That's what it means to be the image of God.
Yeah.
And so, pressure on your choices. You could ruin this thing. Hey, no pressure. We've all ruined it.
Yeah.
And God has a plan
That's
for
right.
that.
That's right.
But also, how about the positive side of that? That as a follower of Jesus, as a member of the family of God, you also have the capacity to, Seminole, Texas, First Baptist Church, West Texas, nobody knows we exist outside of this little bitty, region called, the Southern Panhandle of West Texas. But just Joe Schmo, high school basketball coach, has the ability to change the world for good.
It's good.
With good choices.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Right?
It's good stuff.
I think we're all reproducing something, right?
Always.
And I think about, I think in my own life, what is that? Am I giving birth to things that are good that will last, or things that will decay, the next generation?
Yeah.
And I think about this idea of life breathers and death breathers. John, he led Paradigm for years and years, and he talked about that a lot. When you enter a room or in your situation, are you breathing life to other people, or are you breathing death? Because we all know people who do one or the other, right? And I think that's the question that I have to ask myself is, in my situations, in my circles, in my family, in my home, am I breathing life on my kids and my wife and then in future generations, or am I breathing death around them?
That's right.
Because I wanted to ask you guys, because we're wanting this podcast to be something that people can take in their connect groups and go deeper, and and chew on it some more. So
Sure.
so, and you're probably gonna ask this anyway, but so what's the practical application for our whoever listens to this? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
Tomorrow, the next day.
Yeah. To me is to put yourself in the space that Cain is in the story, and ask yourself that question. Am I mastering the sin that crouches at my door? Are the people in my life, eating the fruit of my good choices or bad choices? Am I, I have inherited this responsibility of, and that's what we'll talk about next, of being my brother's keeper. And, am I fulfilling that responsibility? And am I doing what's right? Yeah. Am I doing what God asked Cain? I've got to evaluate those things, and what part of my world, my little world that I live in, what part of it do I dislike that is my fault? I think when I ask that question, I'm normally humbled by the answer.
I think just under that, what safeguards can I put in place to help me defeat after?
Yeah.
So I find the problem. Now, how can I help myself move past that and quit birthing this nasty sin?
How do I stay out of the field?
Yeah, it's good. The wilderness, the sea.
That's right. How do I stay out of it? Yeah.
I think one of the things, and it's a realization I came to a long time ago, but one of the things that I think about is that not making a choice to do anything about it is a big deal. And I think there's so many people who feel like they're just bystanders. And I don't think you can be a bystander in the gospel.
I love that.
You can't sit on the sidelines.
You're
doing something, whether you think you are or not. You're either making, like you said, life, or you're breathing death. And I think so many people think they're doing neither. And me personally, I don't think that's possible. You're doing one or the other. And so for me, that's like a challenge to myself, that I can't just sit on the sidelines and do nothing, because that is then doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And that is a perfect transition into our next topic and Cain's next question back to God that we'll talk about next time. So thanks for that, Ryan, and we'll pick up with that here in just a second.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to FBC Seminoles, The Table Podcast. A new episode will be released each Monday. We invite you to pull up a chair and join our table each week as we dig into God's Word together. We would love for you to join one of our Connect groups that meets throughout the week and worship with us on Sunday mornings at 9 or 10:30. If you'd like more information, you can call our church office at 432-758-3291 or visit our website at fbcseminole.org.